Hey everyone, it's Todd Daniele, and I'm here today to do a follow-up to a tutorial I did last year where I showed you how to build this octopus arm. So at the end of the video I had said that if there were enough interest I would show how to unwrap, texture, and render this, and that's what I'm here to do today. Now I'm not going to give you a step-by-step through the whole process because that would be a really long video, and I'm finding that when I'm making these videos they're getting a little long, and the viewership drops off after a certain amount of time. So rather than doing step by step, I'm going to show you each section or each part of the process, give you a basic overview, maybe demo or toggle on some layers to show you the exact thing I'm doing, and get you to the final result within 3ds Max, VRay, Zbrush, Substance Painter. And I did do an unwrap, which I did in Rism, and I'll just show you the unwrap really quick right now. So if we go to the arm and we check on unwrap, add it to the stack, I'm just going to show you very quickly the unwrap. This is not a great unwrap. It's just to show you for the tutorial. I did this probably when we did the last tutorial. I separated the suckers, the arms, and the rings around the suckers, and just packed it. There's some wasted space, and I will say that if you're doing this for film or if something that has to be really close up, I would likely do the unwrap when we were in the stage where we built this and we had section of 4 suckers or 2 suckers. I would likely do that and break it into those sections so that we could U-dim this and have like a lot of texel density for the surface. I did this just to streamline the process of the tutorial. I want to keep this all within one UV space. And at the end, when I render out textures from Substance Painter, they're 8K within this one square. So that's just a caveat. So now that we've seen the arm, you'd say, well, what's the next step? We're not going right to Substance Painter. It looks good, but it needs to be more organic. And I think some of the details I want wouldn't be easy to do within Substance Painter. So I'm going to export this arm to Zbrush first. Okay, so we're in Zbrush. This is the arm with some sculpting done to it. And I literally spent less than an hour to achieve this. This is just for the purpose of showing you a tutorial. So what I did was pretty much subdivided a couple levels. And then if we go to layers, I have a bunch of layers here. And I'm going to talk about the one layer that's ticked off. We're going to talk about everything here. So what I did was, let's see, I'm going to turn these all off. There should be a way to do that quicker than I'm doing, but anyway, let's just turn them all off so we see the base arm again. Okay, and from the top, I'm going to show you the first layer, which is turned off. And that was, I set a layer, and I used surface noise, and applied the noise, and it added this nice wobble and a little bit of surface noise. The problem was, and thankfully I used the layer, is that as these rings get to the small end of the arm, the geo got distorted to the point where it was coming through itself and penetrating. So I did not like that, and even dialing it down, I didn't feel comfortable with that. So I turned it off. And then from there I just started to paint. And I'm just going to show you, like, it barely looks like anything. At 100%, it was just really fast strokes like that, crisscrossing and making some shapes. I'm going to just show you each and every layer as I go. That's just a simple brush with a spray pattern and an alpha. And again, I dial each one of these in accordingly. The next thing is a ridge in the arm, and I have this reference, which I'm pulling in here. And you can see it has this little ridge going through, and it comes through on this side. It's on both sides of the arm. I felt that was a nice detail, and you can see the bumps and all the stuff that we're going for. The little line work inside the suckers. That's all stuff that we're going to try to achieve here. So there's the line work for the ridge. And then we can see on the sides of the suckers, I added some little lines, and I dialed them down a bit. Not sure what that one's doing. Let's see. Okay, as we go down, there's the suckers. I painted the lines inside the suckers. Oh, the previous one is some of the wrinkles on the belly of the arm you can see there. And then I have another layer. You can see it kind of compresses and wrinkles the way like an appendage on a person would. So I added that in. And then there's another layer to get the rest of them done. And you can see I'm still missing some line work. So there's probably another one. There's some bumps at the edges of the rings I added in. And this was all done really quickly. I can't emphasize enough. A large sucker noise. So I took a big noise brush and kind of like distorted stuff. And then that's probably like the last couple layers here. Just going to toggle them all on. Just surface details and noise. And then I think I added some bumps and wrinkles at the end. Those are the wrinkles on the back side of the arm. And then finally some small bumps. And if we look at the whole, it's pretty convincing, I think, and it looks pretty good. So the next step would be to make a copy of this. And one you're going to collapse down and use as a high res mesh. And one you're going to keep with the original resolution. So you're going to do one where you drop the subdivs down to 1 and export that mesh. And the reason you want to export this mesh is because if you try to bake the normals in Substance Painter and you don't have this mesh and you use the previous one that had no detail, when it goes to bake, some of this detail that was displaced when I painted sculpted the detail will not get a proper treatment. So you do want to make sure that you export the high res and this low res mesh to Substance Painter. And that's what we're going to show next. Okay, so we're in Substance Painter, and this is the low res mesh after being baked. And the bake settings were decent. There's a little clipping and stuff, but I'm cool with what I see. So that's the bake. You can see some of the detail. You can see some of the line work on those suckers, but there is a little clipping to it. I continue to add detail within Substance Painter. So the first thing I did was, after I have the bake in place, I added this organic flesh preset and turned the color to pink. Now the original arm I showed you was red. I do have another reference of a pink arm, and I kind of prefer the way that this one looks. I'm not going to exactly achieve that, but that's the color scheme I want. So first thing I do is go with the lightest color, and then I take a duplicate of that layer and I put a curvature, like a generator, but it's actually one of the preset masks, and I adjust the balance, the contrast, and all that. And you can see that the darker color is falling within the grooves and adding some interest. And then I make another copy with a darker color and do the same thing. I just adjust it in a different manner, maybe tweak the settings a little bit just to get more variation in color. And then we just come in here, and the next thing I do is add some surface noise, and that's just like this little pore pattern almost that's going across the whole thing. I lighten the suckers, the belly of the mesh, so like in between the suckers is a little lighter now, and I did that because I found as I experimented that the subsurface looked a little better when I did that. And that's a good point to bring up, is that first run through this, you should export the maps, test it out in V-Ray, see how it looks, and then come back here and tweak and just make observations. So I noticed that the areas of the mesh that were lighter showed scattering a bit better. Came back and did that to the belly because that image of the pink arm I just showed you had that. So next thing I did was say, all right, well, it looks good, but the back of the arm in the reference had a little more color, so I added this really vibrant red, a little bit more. These are just like little tweaks of color that I'm adding. And then I got to the point where I needed these sucker lines. So they baked, but they didn't bake perfectly, so I just came in and used the fine brush and sculpted them in. And that's the final product after about an hour in Substance Painter of work. And I kept it brief just to show you how it works. So took this and exported all the maps as a V-Ray Metal Rough template. I have a condensed version where I edit out a couple of things and pop out the maps. And then we're going to go back to Max and see how this implements. Okay, so back in Max, this is the new low-res arm. And what I did was, let's just bring up the material editor. Normally when you export your maps from Substance Painter, you would use a straight V-Ray material. Because we want subsurface, I opted for VRayALSurface. So when we were in Substance Painter, we could have used PBR and had subsurface ability to paint subsurface in Substance Painter. I did not want to do that. I'm not totally familiar with the workflow, and this has worked for me in the past. So what I do is I start with a VRayAL shader, and then I take the maps I would normally use within VRay from Substance Painter, and I assign them where I feel they need to be. So under the density scale, this number here can vary quite a bit based on scale. I found that for the amount of subsurface I wanted, 0.3 is where I ended. And that's after going through some real-time rendering. I would just use my GPU and render within VRay and make this tweak until the subsurface looked the way I wanted to. I have a VRay normal bump set to 60. There's a normal map with the green flipped and a height map. And those are at 8K. Okay, and then as we come down, the diffuse color, that's the base color map is there. I lowered it from 1 to 0.9 just to make it not as harsh. Then you have several places where you have this diffuse bump and you have like a reflection bump. You have all these bump map slots. What I do is put that same normal bump into each slot, turn them on and off, or even dial them in until I get what I like. So that's trial and error. And again, if you have GPU power and you can do it, that's the way to watch what happens. Next thing I did was go with the subsurface colors. So changing these colors can vary the output very much. So I think the best approach is like 2 and 3, set them to a SSS weight of 0 and play with the color. So if I were to turn that to green, you'd see green in the subsurface color coming through in the render. These are the colors I landed on, and to save time, I'm not going to go through the process of showing you all that. Then you have the radius of the subsurface. So what I found was that, I think the radius value is in centimeters by default. The first value, I put this light pink, I left it at 2 or turned it to 2. The second value, I wanted some veins to show. So I turned it to 3, but I also implemented a map. And I'm going to show you the map on the mesh. Just as so this is a black and white map that I had tweaked with these brightness contrasts. So I added color correction to it and tweaked it as I rendered in real time with the GPU to find like this balance to get some veins to show through in subsurface. So that's the only depth of map that I wanted that to be present in, is the subsurface 2, because I felt like that's where it belonged. And then the 3, I spread the radius a little bit more. I messed with the reflection values. I added a reflection map for the inside of the suckers to dull them a little bit compared to the outside of the arm. I changed the reflection distribution to GGX from Beckman. And then you can go between 1.3 and 1.5 on the IOR. I will caution that you think of these things as being shiny and glossy. Like if you've ever seen like a killer whale at an amusement park, like when they have those water shows, they come out and they're all shiny. When they're underwater, they're not shiny. they're in a wet environment, so you don't see the highlights. You want some highlight, which is why I turn these roughness values down, just to show light. But if you had a shiny object underwater, it wouldn't look right. So unless this arm is above water and reaching out to something, it shouldn't be overly shiny. So that was the first reflection slot. Same thing in the second reflection slot. Then the bump map for those reflection slots. And that's about it. I don't think I did much more than that. And all of these values I dialed up and down as I real-time rendered with the GPU. So the last thing we're going to talk about is the final render. But before we do that, let's talk about one of the most important factors when you're doing something like this, which is the lighting. So to show the subsurface scattering, in general, you're going to need a good backlight. So we have the arm here in the viewport. And initially I went with a dome light and some HDR, which does contribute to the overall scattering. So I kept that in place. I turned it on and off. It wasn't much different, but it did help a little bit. And then I have a strong, large backlight. And I real-time rendered as I adjusted the value of that light just to see what would happen. Once that was established, I gave a light for the front. And then a little side light to catch like this outer rim over here, I wanted a little highlight on there. And that looked really good, but I found that it needed like just a little bit of interest. So in a couple spots, I added these little spherical lights. They're V-Ray lights, very high value. They're hidden behind the mass of the mesh. So I have one there and one there, and those contribute to the subsurface. So I'm going to bring up the render, and if I go to 100%, this is rendered at 2560, 1440, which is kind of big, although not really big. You can see it's a little lost in here, but I wanted the scattering to really show. So that subsurface scatter density value in the material, I had to 0.3. If you put that a little higher, some of the line work that we have inside the suckers would show a little better. You can see it here, but it would show a little stronger, or maybe have a little more shadow if I didn't have the scattering showing as much. I do want to also note that you can see all these veins. That is not in the texture. That is the map controlling scattering. So that is not a diffuse element. That is actually subsurface scattering, showing some veins in there. And we can see where I have those two little spherical lights, like this part of the arm. We have a little more scattering. It's also thinner here, so that obviously physics would allow more light through, so that's what's happening here. And then over here, I have the light behind here. You can see these suckers. And even to some extent, the arm has a subtle difference in how much light's coming through when you compare it to, say, over here. I think it's effective. I don't think it's like, it's 3 hours of work. So it is not a movie-ready mesh, but it does show you the principles and the techniques and the approach that, for me at least, work. And it may take some tweaking as far as the scale of your mesh when you do it yourself. It may take some tweaking of values. It may even, if you want to use a different shader, you can do that. But I happen to like the owl shader, and I think it gives a good result. And you can see it's also not too shiny. As we were talking about, it shouldn't be too shiny. I think if you gave this to a compositor and they did some stuff with it, at a distance like that, it's very close to what I had in the reference. At a close-up distance, wouldn't be a 3 hours of work mesh and texture that we would be using. We'd be spending some more time on this. But we've outlined the technique. I hope it's helpful. I hope you enjoy it. If you did like the video, please like and subscribe below. You can also buy me a coffee if you'd like. There's a link in the description. And until the next video, I'm Todd Daniele. Thanks for watching.